She has had enough. For decades, Japan has bowed its head every time China turned off the taps. Every time Beijing threatened to cut supplies of the materials that Japan's entire economy depends on. Every time China reminded Tokyo who was really in control. Japan swallowed it, apologized, backed down, moved on. Not anymore. Sanae Takaichi, Japan's first ever female prime minister, has looked China in the eye and decided that enough is enough. And right now, 6,000 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, a Japanese ship is drilling into the seabed to prove it. Not for oil, not for gas, for something China does not want Japan to find. Something so strategically important that its absence could cripple an entire nation's military, shut down its car factories, and leave its most advanced technology industries unable to function. The hidden ingredient inside every smartphone, every fighter jet, every electric vehicle on the planet, the material the modern world cannot live without, and that China has spent decades quietly cornering the market on. Rare earth elements. China controls nearly 2/3 of all mining on Earth, 92% of all refined production, and in January 2026, it used that dominance as a weapon, banning exports to Japan in direct retaliation for Takaichi's comments about Taiwan. But here's what China did not count in. Takaichi saw this coming years ago, and she's been quietly building a plan, a deep, ambitious, multi-billion-dollar plan to cut China out of Japan's future entirely. This is that plan and why it could change the balance of power in Asia forever. To understand why Takaichi's plan matters so much, you first need to understand just how powerful China's grip on rare earths really is, and what happens when Beijing decides to use it. Rare earth elements are a group of 17 metals with names most people have never heard of. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, europium, lanthanum. They don't look impressive. They're not precious in a way gold or diamonds are precious, but they are absolutely indispensable. Without them, you cannot make the powerful magnets inside electric vehicle motors. You cannot make the guidance systems in missiles. You cannot manufacture the screens in smartphones and televisions. You cannot build the motors in wind turbines. You cannot produce the components in F-35 fighter jets. The modern world, in a very real and very practical sense, cannot function without them. And China has a near total stranglehold on their supply. This was not an accident. From the 1980s onwards, China made a deliberate, long-term strategic decision to dominate rare earth production, investing in mines, processing facilities, and refining capacity on a scale that no other country came close to matching. By the time the rest of the world woke up to what had happened, China was processing 90% of the world's rare earths, and there was almost no viable alternative supply chain in existence. Japan discovered exactly how dangerous this was in 2010. During a territorial dispute over the Senkaku Islands, a small group of uninhabited rocks in the East China Sea that both Japan and China claim, Beijing imposed an informal rare earth embargo on Japan. Japanese factories that depended on these materials watched their stockpiles fall from 4 to 6 months of supply down to just 2 to 3 months within weeks. The automotive sector, the electronics industry, the defense supply chain, all of them stared into an abyss. Japan catapulted. Takaichi was a serving politician during that crisis. She watched it happen, she remembered it, and she spent the next 15 years making sure Japan would never be that vulnerable again. What happened after the 2010 crisis is one of the most remarkable and least reported stories in modern industrial history, and it forms the foundation of everything Takaichi is doing today. In the immediate aftermath of the embargo, Japan launched a quiet, patient, extraordinarily determined national effort to reduce its dependence on Chinese rare earths. It was not dramatic. There were no press conferences or bold speeches. It was just relentless, methodical work carried out over more than a decade by government agencies, trading companies, manufacturers, and research institutions working in coordination. The first major move was a partnership with Lynas Rare Earth, an Australian mining company and the largest rare earth producer outside of China. Japanese trading conglomerate Sojitz invested in Lynas's operations, helping build mining capacity in Australia and a processing facility in Malaysia. For the first time, Japan had a supply chain for rare earths that did not pass through China at all. Japanese companies invested heavily in recycling technology, developing processes to recover rare earth elements from old electronics, motors, and batteries rather than mining them fresh. They redesigned products to use smaller quantities of rare earth materials or to substitute alternative materials where possible. Toyota, Sony, and Panasonic all participated in this national de-risking effort, treating it as a matter of survival rather than corporate social responsibility. The results were significant. By 2025, Japan had reduced its dependence on Chinese rare earths from 90 down to around 60%. A substantial improvement, though still dangerously high given what was about to happen. Because when China imposed its latest export ban in January 2026, the remaining 60% dependency meant Japan was still badly exposed, and Takaichi knew it. Which is why, even as the ban was being announced, she was already executing the next phase of the plan. What Takaichi is doing is not reactive. She's not scrambling to respond to China's export ban. She anticipated it, possibly even provoked it deliberately, knowing that the political crisis would give her the public mandate she needed to accelerate a plan she'd already been building for years. The plan has 3 distinct tracks running simultaneously. The first track is what's happening 6,000 meters below the Pacific Ocean right now. In January 2026, Japan deployed a deep-sea drilling vessel, Chikyu, which translates simply to Earth, to a location near Minamitorishima Island, roughly 2,000 kilometers southeast of Tokyo. The vessel's mission was to drill into the seabed and retrieve mineral-rich mud from a depth that no country's ever mined commercially before. The target was a deposit of rare earth-rich sediment estimated to contain over 16 million tons of rare earth elements, making it the 3rd largest known deposit in the world. Takaichi personally announced the results on social media, saying it was a first step toward industrialization of domestically produced rare earth in Japan. She was careful and measured. This is a test, not yet full commercial production, but the strategic message was loud and clear. Japan is going under the ocean to find its own supply, and it's doing so in waters that China cannot touch. The second track is the international alliance Takaichi's been constructing. In October 2025, she and Trump signed a framework agreement in Tokyo to cooperate on rare earths and critical minerals, with the explicit goal of reducing both countries' dependence on China. Joint mining operations in the United States are expected to begin by mid-2026, with first shipments entering the US market by late 2027. Japan's Metals and Energy Security Organization also signed a memorandum of understanding with US firm Realloys to develop joint processing technologies. Simultaneously, Japan deepened its partnership with Australia, expanding investment in Lynas operations and aligning with the US-Australia Critical Minerals Framework signed in October 2025. And Malaysia, which hosts the only major rare earth processing facility outside China, has been brought into the coalition through a US-Malaysia minerals agreement that extends the allied supply chain further across Southeast Asia. Third track is the domestic industrial revolution Takaichi is funding directly. She has committed billions in government investment to domestic mineral recycling, alternative sourcing research, and the semiconductor industry, because rare earths and semiconductors are 2 sides of the same strategic coin. Japan already controls about 30% of the global semiconductor manufacturing equipment market through companies like Tokyo Electron, Nikon, and Canon. JSR, Shin-Etsu, and Tokuyama, Japanese chemical companies, dominate the specialist materials needed for the most advanced chip manufacturing processes in the world. Takaichi is doubling down on all of it, pumping government money into an industrial base that she wants to be the backbone of a post-China supply chain. China's response, and why it may have backfired. Beijing's reaction to all of this has been to turn up the economic pressure dramatically and rapidly, and there is a serious argument that in doing so, China has made a profound strategic miscalculation. When China imposed its rare earth export ban on Japan in January 2026, the stated goal was to punish Takaichi and force her to retract her Taiwan comments. The implicit goal was to demonstrate Japan's dependency, to show Tokyo and the watching world that China's economic leverage was real, immediate, and painful. Instead, what happened was the opposite. Rather than caving, Takaichi used China's economic attack as a rallying cry during her February 8th snap election. She stood in front of voters and said, "Look, this is exactly why we need to break free. This is exactly why we've been building alternative supply chains. This is exactly why Japan must be strong and independent." 55% of Japanese voters approved of her unyielding stance, seeing China's sanctions not as evidence of Japanese weakness, but as confirmation that Takaichi's strategy was right. She won a 2/3 supermajority, the first time a single party has achieved that in Japan since World War II. She now has the parliamentary power to revise the constitution, fast-track any legislation she wants, and fund her de-risking strategy at whatever scale she chooses. China tried to break her. Instead, it gave her the mandate of a generation. Regional analysts were blunt about what Beijing had done. China's economic scorched earth approach, one analyst said, may have been the single greatest gift Takaichi could have received going into an election. It transformed an abstract geopolitical argument about supply chain vulnerability into a felt, real, present threat that every Japanese voter could understand. Why this matters beyond Japan. What Takaichi is building is not just a Japanese story, it is potentially the most important supply chain realignment happening anywhere in the world right now, and the consequences will reach far beyond Asia. If Japan's deep-sea mining program succeeds commercially, it will add a significant new source of rare earth supply entirely outside Chinese control. If the US-Japan-Australia Critical Minerals Alliance delivers on its investment commitments, it could reduce China's share of global rare earth processing from 92% to somewhere around 60% by 2030. That would not eliminate Chinese dominance, but it would end the near-total monopoly that gives Beijing its most powerful economic weapon. For the United States, Japan is increasingly central to the strategy of building a supply chain that does not depend on Chinese goodwill. Japan's semiconductor equipment companies are irreplaceable. Its rare earth recycling technology is world-leading. Its reliability is an ally under a prime minister who has just demonstrated she will not bend even under simultaneous pressure from Washington and Beijing, a thing American strategic planners are quietly noting with considerable interest. And for the rest of the world, what Japan is doing is a proof of concept. A country that was 90% dependent on a single adversarial supplier 15 years ago has cut that to 60% through patient, sustained, coordinated national effort. It's not been fast, it's not been cheap, but it's been real. And Takaichi is now accelerating that trajectory with a supermajority, a signed deal with the United States, and a ship drilling 6,000 meters into the ocean floor. The question is whether the rest of the world is watching closely enough to learn from it. China spent decades building a monopoly on the materials the modern world cannot live without. It spent years using that monopoly as a diplomatic weapon, and it assumed that Japan, like everyone else, would eventually bend. Sanae Takaichi has a different answer. 6,000 meters under the Pacific Ocean, in laboratories developing recycling technology nobody else has, in mining agreements with Australia and the United States, and in semiconductor. Whether she can finish building it before China turns the pressure up further, that is the race that's happening right now, mostly out of sight. That could determine the shape of the global economy for the next 50 years.